At first, Martin Luther was little more than an obscure academic, an Augustinian monk and professor lecturing on theology. But in 1517, he stepped onto the public stage by directly challenging one of the Catholic Church's most controversial practices, the sale of indulgences. For centuries, the Church had looked for reliable ways to raise money, and by the late Middle Ages, one of the most effective methods was the sale of indulgences. As explained earlier, an indulgence was the Church's remission of the temporal punishment for sin after the sin had been forgiven in confession. Although the theological explanation was complex, to most ordinary people indulgences looked and functioned like a way to buy forgiveness. The Church did little to correct this misunderstanding. To justify the system, Church leaders proclaimed that Christ and the saints had performed far more good works than they needed for salvation. These surplus merits were stored in what the Church called the treasury of merit. Since the Church claimed authority over this treasury, it could dispense merits to believers, especially in exchange for financial contributions. In 1513, a German nobleman named Albert of Hohenzollern accumulated massive debts by purchasing 2 archbishoprics, Mainz and Magdeburg. Pope Leo X, eager for funds to support church projects, agreed to the sale. To help Albert repay the enormous cost, 34,000 ducats, the Pope approved a massive indulgence campaign across his territories. The arrangement was simple. Half of the profits from indulgence sales would go to the Pope, half would go to Albert. The faithful, of course, would pay for both. To carry out the campaign, the Church employed a Dominican friar named Johann Tetzel, whose energetic preaching and marketing tactics became infamous. Tetzel often gave the impression, quite deliberately, that an indulgence guaranteed immediate salvation, both for the purchaser and for loved ones suffering in purgatory. This blatant manipulation outraged Luther. On October 31, 1517, Luther posted his now famous 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church. The church door served as the university's bulletin board, and Luther wrote the document in Latin, indicating he intended it for academic debate, not public distribution. But he chose the eve of All Saints' Day, when crowds of worshippers would visit the church. People saw the document, had it read aloud, and printers quickly reproduced it in German. Within weeks, Luther's criticisms spread across the German states. The 95 Theses questioned not only Tetzel's methods, but the entire theology of indulgences. They brought Luther immediate attention, much of it hostile, from church authorities. Tetzel and other officials demanded that Luther retract his statements. He refused. In 1519, at a public debate in Leipzig, Luther boldly argued that popes and clergy were fallible human beings, not infallible authorities. The ultimate authority for a Christian conscience was Scripture alone, not church tradition or papal decree. This directly threatened the foundations of Catholic authority. In response, church officials formally charged Luther with heresy, a turning point that would lead to the broader conflicts of the Reformation.